In the quiet town of Millfield, where front porches still held rocking chairs and neighbors waved from their driveways, Sunday mornings meant one thing for most families: church. The bells of Grace Fellowship would chime just before 9, and soon after, cars would line the gravel parking lot, their doors opening to release kids in stiff collars and girls in pastel dresses, all shuffling toward the big white building with stained glass windows that caught the morning sun like jewels. Among them was a small boy with wide, thoughtful eyes and a mop of sandy brown hair that never quite stayed combed. He was 8 years old, gentle by nature, the kind of child who noticed when someone was sad before anyone else did. He loved drawing animals, especially birds, and he could sit for hours sketching robins or blue jays in the margins of his school notebooks. At church he wasn't loud or showy, but he paid attention. He remembered the words to every hymn, even the old ones no one else sang anymore. And when the children's choir practiced on Wednesday evenings, he stood right in the front singing softly but clearly, his voice steady like a small bell. The pastor of Grace Fellowship was an elderly man named Reverend Whitmore. He'd been leading the congregation since before most of the current members were born. His hair was silver, his hands were wrinkled, and he always wore the same kind of dark suit with a simple white collar, no matter the season. People called him Pastor Whit, with a kind of reverence like saying his name was a prayer in itself. He'd baptized babies, married couples, sat with the dying, and held hands at funerals. He'd counseled teenagers through heartbreak and helped families after house fires. To the people of Millfield, he wasn't just a religious leader. He was part of the town's soul. Because of that, when Pastor Whit began inviting a few children to help him in the church basement after services, no one thought twice. It was seen as a special honor. He sees something in them, parents would say proudly. He's mentoring them. The basement wasn't scary. It was where the church stored extra folding chairs, holiday decorations, donated clothes, and boxes of old Sunday school books. There was a small table in the corner where kids could sort toys for the annual charity drive, and sometimes Pastor Whit would bring cookies and lemonade. It all seemed innocent, even wholesome. The boy, let's call him Eli, was chosen one Sunday in early spring. He'd been helping clean up after the children's service, stacking chairs with quiet focus, when Pastor Whit knelt beside him and said, "You've got a good heart, son. Would you like to help me downstairs sometime? We could organize the toy closet together. The little ones will be so happy at Christmas." Eli nodded shyly. He didn't say much, but inside he felt a warm glow. The pastor had noticed him. That meant something. The first time he went down to the basement, everything was exactly as he'd imagined. Sunlight filtered through the high, narrow windows. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny stars. Pastor Whit showed him how to sort the toys by type. Stuffed animals in one bin, toy cars in another, puzzles in a third. They worked side by side, and the pastor told stories about how the church used to hold Christmas pageants with live sheep. Eli laughed at that. It felt safe. It felt kind. But then, the next week, things changed. Pastor Whit asked him to come earlier before the main service ended. "Just you and me," he said with a gentle smile. "We've got a lot to do." The basement was quieter then, no one else around. The door clicked shut behind them. At first it was still about the toys. But then the pastor sat Eli on a folding chair and knelt in front of him, adjusting his shoes, smoothing his socks. His hands lingered longer than necessary. He asked Eli if he'd ever kept a secret for God. "Sometimes," he said softly, "God asks us to do hard things. Things only He and you should know. It's a test of your faith." Eli didn't understand, but he nodded because he didn't want to disappoint him. The following Sunday, it happened again, only this time the pastor's hands weren't just on his shoes. They moved higher under his shirt, and he whispered, "Don't tell anyone. This is between you, me, and God. If you tell, you'll break his heart." Eli froze. His stomach twisted like a rope being pulled too tight. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there, eyes fixed on a crack in the concrete floor, wishing he could disappear. When it was over, Pastor Whit gave him a wrapped candy and patted his head. "Good boy," he said. "You're so brave." That night, Eli didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his body feeling wrong, like it didn't belong to him anymore. He kept replaying the words, "Don't tell anyone." He believed them. He thought if he spoke up, God would be angry. Maybe his parents would be angry too. Maybe they'd think he'd done something bad. At breakfast the next morning, his mother noticed he wasn't eating. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, brushing his hair from his forehead. He shrugged. Tired. But over the next few days, little things began to change. He stopped humming hymns in the shower. He flinched when his dad reached to ruffle his hair. He refused to go near the church van, even though it was just parked outside their house for a youth event. One afternoon, his teacher found him hiding in the library during recess, knees pulled to his chest, eyes red. "Did something happen?" she asked gently. He shook his head, but tears spilled anyway. At home, his mother tried everything. Extra bedtime stories, his favorite pancakes, letting him pick the movie on Friday night. But nothing reached him. He became quieter, smaller somehow, like he was folding himself inward to take up less space. He started having nightmares so bad he'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. Once he wet the bed, something he hadn't done since he was 5. His parents exchanged worried glances. They took him to the pediatrician, who suggested anxiety and recommended a counselor. But Eli wouldn't talk to the counselor either. He'd sit in the colorful office with the beanbag chairs and soft lighting, twisting a stress ball in his hand, saying only, "I'm fine." Then came the Sunday when his mother asked if he wanted to go to church. "No," he said quickly, too quickly. "Why not?" "You used to love it." He looked at his shoes. "Pastor Witt." "He makes me feel weird." His mother paused. "Weird how?" Eli didn't answer. He ran to his room and shut the door. That night, after his little sister was asleep, he crept into his parents' room. His mother was reading in bed. He stood in the doorway, trembling. She put her book down. "Come here, baby." He crawled onto the bed and buried his face in her shoulder. For a long time, he just breathed. Then, in a voice so small it was almost a whisper, he said, "Pastor Witt made me do bad things in the basement." Her body went still. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She held him tighter, not saying a word, just letting him cry. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were full of fear. "Don't tell anyone," he begged. "He said God would be mad." "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, tears streaming down her own face. "God is never mad at you for telling the truth, never." The next morning, she called the church office. Her voice shook as she explained what her son had said. She expected concern, maybe even urgency. Instead, she was transferred to an elder, a man who'd known Pastor Witt for 40 years. Now, he said kindly but firmly. "Pastor Witt has served this community with nothing but love and integrity. Are you sure your boy isn't mixing up stories? Maybe he saw something on TV, or misunderstood a hug." She tried to explain, but the elder gently cut her off. "We'll look into it, of course. But let's not rush to judgment. A man like Pastor Witt, well, it's just hard to believe." She hung up feeling sick, not because she doubted her son, but because she realized how hard it would be to be heard. That afternoon, she sat Eli down at the kitchen table. She held both his hands. "I believe you," she said firmly. "Every word. And I'm going to make sure you're safe, no matter what." He looked at her, eyes wide with hope and fear. "Will they believe me?" "They will," she promised. "Because I'll make them listen." But deep down, she wasn't sure. In a town where faith was woven into every street and every family, accusing a beloved pastor felt like setting fire to the foundation of everything. Still, she knew one thing for certain. Her son's pain was real, and silence would only let it grow. Over the next few days, she watched him like a hawk. She canceled his Sunday school. She drove him to school herself instead of letting him take the bus. She slept on a mattress on his bedroom floor so he wouldn't wake up alone in the dark. And slowly, carefully, she began documenting everything, dates, times, his exact words, changes in his behavior. She didn't know if it would help, but she knew she had to try. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, Eli asked, "Will I ever feel normal again?" She pulled him close. "You're already normal, sweetheart. You're brave, and you're not alone." He leaned his head on her shoulder and didn't say anything else. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't flinch when she touched him. The next morning, she called the school counselor, a woman known for her calm presence and sharp instincts. She didn't give details over the phone, just said, "I need to talk to you about my son." "It's serious." The counselor listened without interrupting. When the mother finished speaking, there was a long pause. Then softly, "Thank you for telling me. I'll be there for him, and I know what to do next." Within 24 hours, a report was filed with Child Protective Services. Within 48, a detective specializing in child welfare knocked on their door. Eli was scared, but his mother stayed with him the whole time. The detective didn't wear a uniform. She sat on the floor with him, asked gentle questions, and let him draw pictures instead of forcing words. When he finally whispered what had happened, she didn't gasp or cry. She just nodded, her eyes steady and kind. "Thank you for being so brave," she said. "You did the right thing." That night, as Eli slept, his mother sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring out the window. The town looked the same, peaceful, familiar, bathed in moonlight. But everything had changed. She knew there would be whispers now, judgments, maybe even anger. But she also knew something else. Her son had trusted her enough to speak. And that trust was more sacred than any stained glass window or Sunday sermon. She didn't know what came next. The investigations, the meetings, the possibility of a trial. But she did know this. She would stand beside him every step of the way, not as a believer in a perfect church, but as a mother who loved her child more than she feared the truth. And in that quiet kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant hoot of an owl, she made a silent promise, not just to Eli, but to every child who'd ever been told to keep a secret that hurt. "Your voice matters, and I will help the world hear it." After that first call to the school counselor, everything moved faster than anyone expected, but also slower than anyone could bear. The detective's visit had been calm, even gentle, but it left a strange new weight in the house. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like waiting for thunder after you've seen the lightning. You know it's coming. You just don't know how loud it will be. The boy stayed home from school for a few days, not because he was sick, but because his mother wanted to keep him close, shield him from questions, from stares, from the kind of well-meaning curiosity that could feel like poking at a bruise. She read to him, made his favorite mac and cheese, let him watch cartoons even though it was a school day. But she could tell he was listening for the phone to ring, for a knock at the door, for the sound of his father's car pulling into the driveway with news. His father had been quiet since that night on the porch. He wasn't angry, not at his son, never at his son. But there was a tightness in his jaw, a new stiffness in the way he moved, like he was holding something heavy inside his chest. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer, the man who could patch a roof or calm a crying neighbor with the same calm hands. But this wasn't something he could hammer into place or smooth over with a kind word. So he did the only thing he knew how. He stayed. He made coffee in the morning without being asked. He sat with his son at dinner, even when the boy barely touched his food. And at night he stood in the doorway long after lights out, just watching him sleep, as if making sure no one, not even a memory, could hurt him now. Meanwhile, the church elders held a meeting. It wasn't public. No one outside the leadership knew it happened. But word travels fast in small towns, especially when it's whispered. By Tuesday, people were already talking. Not loudly, not directly, but in hushed tones at the grocery store, over fence posts in the back pews before service. "Did you hear? I can't believe it. Must be a misunderstanding." The elders called the boy's mother again. This time it wasn't just one elder, it was two. They met in the church library, a room lined with old Bibles and dusty hymnals, sunlight slanting through tall windows. They offered her tea. They spoke softly. They said all the right things. "We take this very seriously. We care deeply about your family. Pastor Witt is cooperating fully." But then came the questions that felt less like concern and more like cross-examination. "How exactly did your son describe what happened? Has he shown any signs of imagination? Fantasy? Are you sure he wasn't influenced by something he saw online?" She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But her words were clear and sharp like glass. "My son told me what happened. He didn't make it up. And if you're asking whether an 8-year-old boy would invent a story about being touched in a church basement by a man everyone trusts, then you don't know children, and you don't know my son." One of the elders leaned forward, his expression pained. "We're not saying he's lying. We're just, Pastor Witt has given his life to this church. He's buried our parents, baptized our children. It's hard to imagine him capable of such a thing." "I know," she said quietly. "That's what makes it so dangerous." The meeting ended with promises to look into it thoroughly and follow proper channels. But when she walked out, She felt not reassured, but dismissed. Like her son's pain was just another problem to be managed, not a truth to be faced. Back at school, things shifted. The counselor made sure the boy had a safe space, a quiet room he could go to if he felt overwhelmed. His teacher was told only that he'd been through a family stressor and might need extra patience. But kids noticed things. They saw how he jumped when the door slammed, how he never went to the boys' bathroom alone, how he stopped raising his hand even when he knew the answer. One afternoon during art class, he drew a picture. Not birds this time. It was a dark room with one small window high up. In the corner, a figure in a dark suit, and a smaller figure curled up, arms around his knees. The teacher didn't say anything. She just quietly took the drawing to the counselor. That same day, Child Protective Services sent a caseworker. She was young, with kind eyes and a notebook that never left her hand. She didn't ask the boy to repeat his story right away. Instead, she played a board game with him, asked about his favorite animals, let him show her his bird sketches. Only after he'd relaxed did she gently say, "Sometimes when something scary happens, it helps to talk about it. You don't have to. But if you do, I'll listen, and I'll help keep you safe." He looked at her for a long time. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "He told me it was a secret for God." Her face didn't change. No shock, no pity, just steady attention. "That wasn't true," she said simply. "God doesn't ask children to keep secrets that hurt them." That was the man talking. Not God, the boy blinked. It was the first time someone had said that out loud. As the days passed, more people got involved. A child advocacy center scheduled a forensic interview, a special kind of talk designed just for kids who've been through trauma. The room was soft-colored with toys and books, no sharp edges, no uniforms. A trained specialist asked open-ended questions. "Can you tell me about the times you went to the basement? What did you see? How did your body feel?" He didn't give a perfect story. He mixed up some days. He couldn't remember what Pastor Witt was wearing the third time, but the core was consistent. The locked door, the whispers, the hands, the fear, the candy afterward like a reward for staying quiet. The detective listened to the recording with the prosecutor. After it ended, there was silence. Then the prosecutor said, "This is enough." But enough didn't mean easy, because in Millfield, faith wasn't just Sunday, it was woven into everything. The church ran the food pantry. It hosted the fall festival. Its members coached Little League and led scout troops. To accuse Pastor Witt wasn't just to accuse a man. It felt to many like accusing the town itself. Soon the whispers turned into glances. At the post office, the cashier who used to smile now looked away. At the gas station, a man muttered, "Some people will say anything to get attention, loud enough to be heard." The boy's mother started parking farther from the store entrance, wearing sunglasses even on cloudy days just to avoid being recognized. Then came the phone calls. Most were silent, just breathing on the other end. But one night, a man's voice, low and angry. "You're destroying a good man's life over a child's dream. Shame on you." She hung up, hands shaking, but didn't tell her husband. She didn't want to add to his burden. The worst was when her best friend from church stopped returning her texts. They'd shared baby showers, prayer circles, late-night talks over coffee. Now radio silence. It hurt more than the stranger's stares, but not everyone turned away. An older woman from down the street, someone they barely knew, left a casserole on their porch with a note. "Praying for your family. You're doing the right thing." A former Sunday school teacher slipped a handwritten card into their mailbox. "I believe you, and I'm so sorry." Small acts, but they were lifelines. Meanwhile, the church held its usual Sunday service. Pastor Witt wasn't there. The elders said he was on medical leave, but his absence was like a hole in the room. People glanced at the empty pulpit, then at each other, then quickly looked away. No one mentioned the boy. No one mentioned the investigation. They sang the hymns, passed the offering plate, and went home, carrying the unspoken question in their hearts. Could it be true? Back at home, the boy started having a new kind of nightmare. Not about the basement, but about standing in front of the whole church, everyone pointing at him, calling him a liar. He'd wake up gasping, convinced he'd ruined everything. His mother would hold him and say, "You didn't do anything wrong. You told the truth." "That's brave. But what if no one believes me?" he'd whisper. Then they're not listening, she'd say. But I am, and that's enough for now. She pressed it to her chest and cried, not from sadness but from awe. Her son was fighting. Even in the dark, he was finding his way back to light. The forensic interview led to more action. The police got a warrant to search the church basement. They found nothing physical, no hidden cameras, no notes. But they did recover old security footage from a camera that had been malfunctioning for months. The church custodian admitted, under questioning, that Pastor Witt had asked him to disable the basement feed because the kids get shy on camera. That detail, small as it seemed, told a story all its own. Then came the hardest part, deciding whether to press charges. The prosecutor explained it plainly. If we move forward, it will go public. There will be a trial. Your son may have to testify. It will be hard. But if we don't, this could happen to someone else. The parents looked at each other. They didn't need to speak. They both knew the answer. We'll do it, the mother said. For him, and for every other child who might walk into that basement next. The boy didn't fully understand what a trial meant, but he understood this: people would listen. And maybe, just maybe, they'd believe him. In the weeks that followed, a child therapist began visiting their home. She didn't push. She played games, told stories, taught him breathing exercises for when his chest felt tight. Slowly, he started talking. Not just about what happened, but about how it made him feel. Ashamed, confused, angry, scared. And that was okay. All of it was okay. One day, during a session, he asked, "Will I ever not feel scared when I see a man in a suit?" The therapist didn't promise it would go away. Instead, she said, "Your body learned to be scared to protect you. Now we're going to teach it that you're safe. It takes time, but you're not alone." That night, for the first time in months, he slept through the night without a nightmare. Outside their home, the town remained divided. Some families pulled their kids from Grace Fellowship. Others doubled down, organizing prayer circles for Pastor Witt. A local news station picked up the story, but only as a brief mention. Local pastor under investigation following child welfare report. No names. No details. But in Millfield, everyone knew. The boy's parents prepared for what came next. They met with lawyers. They learned about victims' rights. They practiced what to say if reporters called. And through it all, they kept one rule: protect their son's peace. No interviews. No social media. No public statements. His healing came first, before justice, before headlines, before anyone's opinion. And in the quiet moments, when the sun slanted through the kitchen window, when his little sister made him laugh with a silly dance, when he finally drew a bird again, wings spread wide, they found small pockets of normalcy. Not the old normal, but a new one. One built on truth, on courage, on love that refused to look away. Because the hardest part wasn't just what had happened in the basement. It was learning to trust the world again, and that journey had only just begun. The morning it happened. The sky was gray and heavy, the kind of overcast that makes everything feel muffled, like the world is holding its breath. At the parsonage, a small tidy house just behind the church with white shutters and a well-kept garden, the elderly pastor was sipping tea at his kitchen table, reading his Bible as he did every day before dawn. He looked the same as always, calm, composed, dressed in slacks and a cardigan, his silver hair neatly combed. No one passing by would have guessed that in just a few hours his life would shatter like dropped glass. 2 police cars pulled up quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights. Officers stepped out, their movements deliberate, respectful but firm. They knocked once, then waited. When he opened the door, they didn't cuff him right away. They spoke softly, explained why they were there. He didn't argue, didn't cry, just nodded slowly as if he'd been expecting this for a long time. He asked to pack a small bag, just toiletries, his reading glasses, a change of clothes. Then he walked out with them, head slightly bowed, and got into the back of the cruiser without a word. By noon, the news had spread through Millfield like wildfire. It started with a text, then a phone call, then a post on the local community board. Pastor Witt arrested. Charges related to child. No details, but none were needed. In a town this small, silence speaks louder than headlines. At the grocery store, women froze in the cereal aisle. At the hardware shop, men stopped mid-sentence. wrenches dangling from their hands. At Grace Fellowship, the church secretary sat at her desk, tears streaming down her face, unable to answer the ringing phone. Some people were stunned into disbelief. Others felt a sickening wave of clarity. Suddenly, old unease made sense. That time he asked a boy to stay late. That comment about special bonds with certain children. The way he'd always insist on closed doors during counseling. But for every person who felt doubt, there were two who refused to believe it. "It's a setup," one man declared at the diner, slamming his coffee cup down. "That family's always been trouble." Another woman whispered to her friend, "Children lie, especially when they're confused or seeking attention." Church elders held an emergency meeting that afternoon. Their official statement, released by evening, was careful, measured. "We are deeply saddened by these allegations. We fully support the legal process and ask our congregation to pray for all involved." But behind closed doors, they scrambled, calling lawyers, reviewing records, trying to distance the church from the man who'd shaped it for 40 years. Meanwhile, at the boy's house, the air was thick with tension. His mother had woken to a voicemail from the detective. "It's done. He's in custody." She didn't tell her son right away. She waited until after breakfast, until he'd finished his drawing of a robin perched on a fence. Then she sat beside him on the couch and said gently, "They took Pastor Witt to the police station today." He didn't look up, just kept coloring the bird's wing with a red crayon. "Is he in jail?" "For now," she said. "While they figure things out," he nodded. Then after a long pause, "Will he come back?" "I don't think so," she said. "Not to the church. Not near you." He set the crayon down. "Good." It was the first time he'd said anything that sounded like relief. But relief didn't last long. Because with the arrest came exposure, and with exposure came backlash. By the next day, their mailbox was full of letters. Most were supportive, handwritten notes from strangers saying, "Thank you for speaking up," or "You're not alone." But tucked among them were others. One read, "You've ruined a holy man's life over a child's fantasy. May God forgive you." Another had no return address, just a crude drawing of a broken cross with the words "liars" scrawled beneath it. Then came the online storm. Though local news hadn't named the family, rumors spread fast on social media. Old photos from church events were dug up. Group shots where the boy stood near Pastor Witt. People dissected them, claiming proof of affection, of trust, as if that disproved harm. Anonymous accounts posted comments like, "Why didn't the parents supervise?" Or "Real victims don't wait weeks to tell." The mother deleted the family's social media accounts, but the damage was done. Her workplace got calls. Her husband was asked awkward questions by a co-worker at the hardware store where he managed inventory. Even the school principal pulled her aside one morning, not to offer support, but to say, "We're getting concerns from other parents." "Concerns about what?" she asked, voice tight. "That your son might be influencing other children, spreading stories." She stared at him. "You think my 8-year-old is running some kind of rumor campaign?" The principal looked uncomfortable. "I'm just saying, we need to maintain a safe environment for everyone." She walked away shaking. Not from anger, but from the chilling realization. Even institutions meant to protect children could become part of the problem when truth threatened comfort. At home, they tried to keep things normal. Movie nights, pancake Saturdays, walks in the woods behind their house where no one could see them. But normal was slipping through their fingers. One evening, the boy's little sister asked, "Why don't we go to church anymore?" He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Their mother took a breath. "Because sometimes even places that are supposed to be safe aren't," the girl frowned. "But God's still good, right?" "Yes," the mother said firmly. "God is good. People aren't always." That night, the boy asked if they could pray. Not the church kind with folded hands and memorized words, but the real kind. So they sat on his bed and he whispered, "Please keep me safe, and help me not be scared anymore." His mother added, "And help the people who don't understand to listen." But outside their walls, listening was in short supply. The church held a special service that Sunday. Attendance was lower than usual, but the pews were filled with loyal members, faces set in grim determination. The interim pastor, a visiting minister from the next town over, spoke about forgiveness, about not judging before all facts were known. He never mentioned the boy, never acknowledged the pain, just urged the congregation to stand by their shepherd in his time of trial. Afterward, a group of longtime members gathered in the fellowship hall, voices low but intense. "This is an attack on our faith," one woman said. "The world wants to tear down godly men," another nodded. "That family should have handled it privately. Now the whole church looks bad." No one asked how the boy was doing. No one wondered if he was eating, sleeping, drawing birds again. To them, he wasn't a child, he was a problem. A disruption. A threat to the peace they'd built their lives around. Yet not everyone stayed silent. An elderly man who'd been coming to Grace Fellowship since the 1960s stood up during the meeting. His voice trembled, but his eyes were clear. "I've known Pastor Witt for 50 years, he said, "and I loved him like a brother. But if even one word of this is true, then we failed. Not just him. We failed that boy. And if we spend all our energy defending a man instead of protecting children, then we've lost our way." He walked out before anyone could respond. No one followed him. But a few people looked down at their hands, ashamed. Back at the house, the family received unexpected help. A local advocacy group for survivors of abuse reached out. They didn't ask for details. They just offered counseling, legal guidance, a support network of other families who'd been through similar ordeals. For the first time, the mother didn't feel alone. She met another parent whose child had been hurt by a coach years ago. They talked for hours about fear, guilt, the crushing weight of being doubted. "You did the right thing," the other parent said, "even when it feels like the whole world is against you." The boy started seeing a new therapist, one trained specifically in trauma from spiritual abuse. She explained things in ways he could understand. When someone uses God to make you do something scary, that's not God's voice. That's the person hiding behind God. He began to separate the two in his mind, the loving presence he'd always felt in prayer, and the man who'd twisted that love into a weapon. Slowly, he started reclaiming pieces of himself. He went back to school full-time. He joined the art club. He even laughed again, real, unguarded laughter, when his sister tried to imitate their grumpy cat. But the legal process moved like molasses. Bail hearings, evidence reviews, delays. Every week felt like walking on eggshells, waiting for the next shoe to drop. The prosecutor warned them, trials take time, and when it came, it would be hard. The defense would try to paint the boy as confused, coached, unreliable. They'd dig into the family's past, look for anything to cast doubt. "We'll be ready," the mother said. But inside, she was terrified. Then came the day the church leadership finally did something unexpected. They issued a formal letter, not to the public, but to every member of the congregation. It admitted that upon reviewing old records, they'd found concerning patterns in how Pastor Witt had interacted with children over the years. They confessed they'd ignored red flags. They apologized for not listening sooner, for prioritizing reputation over safety. And they announced new policies, mandatory background checks, 2-adult rule for all youth activities, mandatory abuse prevention training for staff and volunteers. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to undo the harm. But it was a start. The boy's mother read the letter aloud to him that night. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do you think they really mean it?" "I hope so," she said. "But even if they don't, we know the truth. And that's what matters." As summer turned to fall, the town began to shift, slowly, painfully. Some families left Grace Fellowship for good. Others stayed, but with new eyes. The church's annual fall festival was smaller that year. Fewer kids, less laughter. The bake sale table sat half empty, but in the boy's backyard something new was growing. His mother had helped him plant a small garden, sunflowers, marigolds, and a single sapling oak. "This is your safe place," she told him. "No one can take it from you." He watered it every evening, watching the green shoots push through the soil, reaching for the light. And though the road ahead was still long, filled with court dates, tough questions, and the lingering ache of betrayal, he was learning something powerful. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking anyway. It's planting flowers in broken ground. It's believing, even when no one else does, that healing is possible, because the truth had been spoken. And once spoken, it couldn't be buried again. The morning of the trial, the courthouse steps were crowded. Not with reporters. This wasn't a big city case with cameras and microphones, but with people from Millfield. Some wore Sunday clothes, others work boots and jackets. They stood in small clusters, speaking in low voices, eyes darting toward the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling faintly of old wood and floor polish. The courtroom itself was modest. Wood-paneled walls, stiff chairs, a judge's bench that looked more like something from a high school play than a place where lives would be weighed. The boy didn't come through the front door. He arrived through a side entrance guided by a victim advocate and his mother, both holding his hands like he was made of glass. He wore a button-down shirt his grandmother had ironed the night before, his hair combed, his shoes polished. He looked older than 9, serious, quiet, eyes taking in everything but giving nothing away. They led him to a small room off the main hallway where he'd wait until it was time. There were books, soft chairs, and a window that looked out onto a patch of grass. No one would see him enter the courtroom. No one would watch him walk past the man in the defendant's chair. That was the law's small mercy. Children didn't have to face their abuser directly. His mother stayed with him until the last possible moment. She didn't say much, just held him close and whispered, "You're safe here. You're doing the right thing, and no matter what happens, I'm proud of you." He nodded, gripping her hand like a lifeline. Then the advocate gently said, "It's time." In the courtroom, tension hung thick as fog. On one side sat the prosecution, calm, prepared, folders neatly stacked. On the other, the defense team, sharp suits, calm expressions already framing their story in their minds. And in the middle, behind a railing, sat the elderly pastor. He looked smaller than people remembered, frailer, his shoulders hunched, his hands folded in his lap like he was praying. He didn't look at the jury, didn't scan the room for supporters, just stared at the floor, as if already bracing for what was coming. The jury was made up of 12 ordinary people, farmers, teachers, retirees, a mechanic. None of them wanted to be there, but now they were, and the weight of it showed in their faces. They'd been told this was about a child, about trust, about what happens when the people we're taught to honor break that trust in the worst way. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor spoke first, clear, steady, no drama. She laid out the facts simply. A boy trusted his pastor. That trust was used against him. Evidence would show a pattern, not a mistake. She didn't call him a monster. She didn't shout. She just said, "This is about what happened in a basement no one was watching, and about a child who finally found the courage to speak." The defense lawyer stood next. He was polite, respectful, even kind in his tone. But his words were sharp. He said the boy was confused, that memories can be shaped by adults, by fear, by suggestion. He pointed out there was no physical evidence, no DNA, no photos, no witnesses. Just a child's word against a man who'd spent his life serving others. Innocent until proven guilty, he reminded them. And in this case, reasonable doubt isn't just possible, it's likely. Then came the evidence. First, the school counselor took the stand. She described the boy's sudden change, the nightmares, the drawings, the way he'd flinch at touch. She explained how she'd followed protocol, how she'd reported what she saw because it matched known signs of trauma. The defense tried to paint her as overeager, too quick to assume the worst. But she stayed calm. "I don't assume," she said. "I listen." Next, the detective. He walked the jury through the timeline, the initial report, the forensic interview, the search of the church basement. Then he played a clip of the security footage they'd recovered. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough, the pastor leading the boy into the basement alone, again and again. Each time the door closing behind them. Each time no one else around. The defense argued it proved nothing, just a man helping a child sort toys. But the prosecutor asked one quiet question. If it was innocent, why disable the camera? The custodian, called next, shifted in his seat. He admitted Pastor Witt had asked him to turn off the basement feed months ago, saying the kids get shy. When pressed, he added, "I thought it was odd." But he was the pastor. Who was I to say no? A murmur rippled through the room. Then came the moment everyone had been dreading and waiting for. The boy would testify. But not in the courtroom. By law, he'd appear on a closed-circuit screen in a separate room. His voice piped in through speakers. The jury would see his face. The defendant would not. When his image appeared on the monitor, small, pale, sitting in that quiet side room with the advocate beside him, the courtroom fell so silent you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. The prosecutor didn't rush him. She started with easy questions. How old are you? Do you go to school? Do you like drawing? He answered in a soft voice but clearly, then gently. Do you remember going to the church basement with Pastor Witt? He nodded on screen. Yes. What did you do there? At first, we sorted toys. For Christmas. And then, he looked down, swallowed. Then, he asked me to keep secrets. What kind of secrets? He said God wanted me to be brave, and that I couldn't tell anyone, or God would be sad. The prosecutor paused, let the words hang. Did anything happen that made you feel scared? Yes, his voice barely above a whisper now. He touched me, under my clothes, and he said it was our special prayer. A woman in the jury box covered her mouth. An older man in the back row closed his eyes. Even the judge looked down at his notes, his jaw tight. The defense lawyer stood for cross-examination. He approached the screen like he was handling something fragile. You're a smart boy, he began kindly. But sometimes when we're scared or upset, our minds can mix up what's real and what we imagine. Has that ever happened to you? No, the boy said. Are you sure? Did your mom or dad ever talk to you about what to say? No, I told them first. Before anyone else. Did you watch any TV shows or movies about bad things happening in churches? No. Do you understand what a promise is? Yes. Pastor Witt was very kind to you, wasn't he? He gave you candy. He let you help. He called you special. The boy was quiet for a long time. Then he made me feel special. So I wouldn't tell. The lawyer paused. Tried another angle. You didn't tell anyone for weeks. Why not? Because he said God would be mad. And I thought, maybe I did something wrong. The room felt like it was holding its breath. When the questioning ended, the boy was excused. His image faded from the screen, but his words stayed, echoing in the silence, in the faces of the jury, in the heart of every parent in that room, who suddenly saw their own child in that small, brave voice. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Expert witnesses, more documents, arguments about what reasonable doubt really meant. But nothing compared to that moment. Nothing could erase it. Outside, the town buzzed. People who'd come to support the pastor now looked shaken. One woman stood on the courthouse steps, tears streaming, saying, I brought my kids to him for blessings. I let him hold them. Oh God, what have we done? That night, the boy didn't talk much. He ate a little, drew a picture of a courtroom with a big sun shining through the window, and went to bed early. His mother sat beside him until he fell asleep, watching his chest rise and fall, praying he wouldn't dream of cameras or questions or eyes watching him. The next morning, closing arguments. The prosecutor stood and said simply, This case isn't about whether Pastor Witt was a good man once. It's about what he did when no one was looking. Children don't lie about things like this, not in the way he described. Not with that kind of detail. Not with that kind of pain in their voice. You heard him, you saw him, and you know the truth. The defense reminded them of the presumption of innocence, of the lack of physical proof, of the danger of ruining a life on a child's memory. But when the jury left to deliberate, most people in the courtroom already knew how it would end. They didn't take long. Less than 3 hours. When they filed back in, the foreperson stood, hands folded, voice steady. We find the defendant guilty, a gasp, a sob. The pastor didn't move, just closed his eyes. The boy wasn't there to hear it. His mother had taken him home to their quiet house, to their little garden where the sunflowers were blooming. But when she told him later that evening, he didn't cheer, didn't smile. He just leaned against her and said, Now he can't hurt anyone else. In the days that followed, the town didn't celebrate. There was no victory parade, just a heavy quiet like after a storm. Some people apologized quietly, privately to the family. Others avoided them altogether. The church held a service of repentance, not for the crime, but for their own silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that courtroom, something rare had happened. A child had spoken and the world had listened. Not because he was loud, but because he was truthful. Not because he demanded it, but because someone finally chose to believe him. That, more than any verdict, was the real turning point. The sentencing hearing came on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells like fallen leaves and wood smoke. The courtroom was quieter this time. Fewer onlookers, less tension, as if the town had already exhaled. The elderly pastor sat in the same chair, but he looked even smaller now, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on his hands. He didn't wear his usual suit, just plain slacks and a sweater like any old man waiting for a bus. But the weight of what he'd done and what was coming hung in the room like fog. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice, listened as the prosecutor laid out the facts one last time. She spoke of the boy's trauma, the betrayal of trust, the pattern of secrecy, the years of silence that allowed it to continue. She asked for the maximum sentence allowed by law, 22 years with no chance of parole. This wasn't a moment of weakness, she said. It was a calculated abuse of power, hidden behind a collar and a pulpit. Then the defense stood. This time there was no fight left in their voice. No claims of innocence, just a quiet plea for mercy based on age, health, and decades of service. He's an old man, the lawyer said. He may not live to see the end of that sentence, but the judge didn't flinch. She turned to the pastor and said, "You used your position, the trust people placed in you, the love they gave you freely, to hurt a child. That's not just a crime. It's a violation of everything faith is supposed to stand for, and for that there can be no softness." She sentenced him to 22 years in state prison, no parole, no early release. When the bailiff led him away, he didn't look back. Outside, the boy's family stood on the courthouse steps, not celebrating, just breathing. The mother held her son's hand tightly. He didn't say much, just looked up at the sky where a flock of geese flew south in a perfect V. "They're going somewhere safe," he said softly. She squeezed his hand. "So are we." In the weeks that followed, life didn't magically fix itself. Healing never works that way. But things began to shift, slowly, quietly, like roots growing under snow. The church, Grace Fellowship, held one last service before closing its doors for good. Attendance was low. The pews were half empty. The interim pastor spoke not of glory, but of grief. Grief for the trust broken, for the children failed, for the years spent valuing reputation over righteousness. After the final hymn, people lingered, hugging, crying, some taking small mementos, a candle, a hymnal, a framed photo from the church's early days. By sunset, the lights were off, the doors locked, and the building stood silent, its stained glass windows dark. Some members joined other congregations. Others stopped going to church altogether. A few started meeting in homes, trying to rebuild faith without the weight of the past. It wasn't neat. It wasn't easy. But it was honest. For the boy, school became a place of peace again. His teacher noticed he started raising his hand. He joined the school newspaper and wrote a short piece about birds, how they rebuild nests after storms. No one knew it was about him, but it didn't matter. He was speaking in his own way. He still saw his therapist every other week. They talked less about the basement now and more about feelings, anger, sadness, even hope. One day he asked, "Will I ever stop thinking about it?" "Maybe not completely," she said gently. "But one day it won't be the loudest thing in your head. One day it'll just be part of your story, not the whole thing." He liked that idea. At home, his drawings changed. No more dark rooms. No more curled-up figures. Now he sketched trees with strong trunks, rivers that flowed to the sea, birds in flight. His little sister taped one to the fridge with a note that read, "My brother is an artist." His parents, too, were healing. They'd lost friends, yes, but they'd also found unexpected allies. Neighbors who left groceries on the porch, old classmates who reached out to say, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." They joined a support group for families of survivors, not to dwell in pain, but to share strength. They learned they weren't broken, they were brave. And then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman in the next county. She wrote that her son had been hurt by a youth leader 10 years ago. They'd never reported it. Too scared. Too ashamed. But after hearing about the trial, just bits and pieces on the local news, she'd finally taken him to a counselor. "You gave us courage," she wrote. "Thank you for breaking the silence." The mother read it twice, then tucked it into a folder with other letters like it. There were more than she expected. 6, then 10, then 15. Each one a quiet echo of the same truth. You're not alone. That's when they decided to do something. With the help of the advocacy group, they worked with state lawmakers to push for new rules in houses of worship. Not just churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, any place where adults work with children. The law would require background checks, mandatory training on recognizing abuse, and a strict 2-adult rule for all youth activities. No more closed doors, no more secrets. It took months of meetings, testimonies, and quiet persistence, but eventually the bill passed. It wasn't named after anyone. It didn't need to be. But people in Millfield called it the Boys' Law. 2 years after the trial, on a bright spring morning, the town gathered in the square, not for a festival or a parade, but for something quieter. A tree planting ceremony. Not just any tree, but a young oak, strong and straight with deep roots. Beside it, a small bronze plaque was unveiled. It didn't mention names or crimes. Just these words: for the children who spoke and those who finally listened.